All right, welcome back. And it's time for us to have a conversation in the health segment. Now, remember, this segment is sponsored by the Farmers Market. All right, and today we're going to be talking about food poisoning. Dr. Kelvin Owusu is the medical director of Optimal Care Diagnostics, and he's here to help us understand what it's all about. Good morning, doctor.
Good morning, David.
How are you doing?
Very well.
Yeah. Post-elections.
I know,
How you feel?
and all the drama.
So, I love food. I'm sure we all love food. When does food become poisonous?
Well, people assume that food poisoning means somebody is trying to kill you, so they poisoned your food. But actually, it's not. It's just illness that comes as a result of eating contaminated food. Food contaminated by bacteria, viruses, sometimes parasites, or toxins that they produce.
Okay.
So it may be the bacteria may not be present in the food, but the toxin that they produce found its way into the food. And so the consequence of that is what we call food poisoning.
Okay.
I mean, and I dare say almost everybody has experienced food poisoning at some point in their life. In fact, in the USA, it said that at least 1 million people have food poisoning every single year.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Is that prevalent?
Over millions. Yeah, it's very, very prevalent.
Yeah.
And especially now that we're entering the festive season, there are going to be a lot of events, a lot of parties, a lot of sittings. So food poisoning rates will also go up. And yeah, so I guess the timing is perfect for this discussion.
Typically, okay, so you've explained, I mean, increase in microbial activity and all those kind of things, but what should we look out for? What should we be watching out for? How do we prevent ourselves from becoming victims of that?
So let's look at it from two aspects: the eater and then the person preparing.
Okay.
So now, if you are preparing the food, you must make sure that your environment is clean, obviously, because most of these toxins will get into the food from the environment. So if you are preparing the food in unclean environments, you are exposing yourself and whoever is going to eat the food eventually.
Okay.
If you are, especially those who cook food commercially, if the kitchen is near a waste dump or a public toilet facility,
Okay.
or even a home toilet facility, that's a risk, because the house flies would go from the waste onto the food, and that's a problem. If you're cooking the food and you don't cook it well, I know culturally we tend to overcook our food, but sometimes we undercook it, and that's a problem because heat is one of the cheapest ways of dealing with these bacteria and toxins.
Okay.
Heat can actually destroy them so that it doesn't get into your body in the first place. So if you don't cook the food well, there's a problem, which obviously means that if you're eating raw foods, let's say salads, fruits, and other forms of vegetables, you are putting yourself at risk if you don't clean it properly. So you need to take extra precaution when you're washing your food. Sometimes you may have to go to the next step and actually use some other things like vinegar to clean the food some more, so that you are sure that you're not taking in some pathogens, which will then cause problems. Now, to the person eating the food, where you are eating the food is important. The state of the food you're eating is important. You need to be eating the food. If the food is meant to be hot, you need to be eating it hot. And interestingly, when it comes to food poisoning, reheating food is a problem in a manner of speaking, because not if there is for some of the toxins, if the food was not originally cooked properly, reheating it does not help you. So the cooker must make sure that he or she is done well. So that's one aspect. Now, if you're eating the food in an environment where there are a lot of housefly, a lot of garbage, where you're eating the food counts. You see, because the bacteria will come from the environment onto the food through the houseflies or other insects as well. Your own hands. Because some of these bacteria are, we call it fecal-oral transmission, which means that, let's say if you're going to use the loo, number 2, you don't wash your hand properly. You have particles on your hand that you cannot see. You put this in the food, you eat it yourself. So you are literally self-infecting yourself. And you can also do that if you feed somebody else, a child. You are infecting that child. And once somebody in your house has food poisoning, the probability that it will spread is high, you see. And so it's important that we protect everybody by doing the right things. Eating warm foods, or eating foods that are meant to be eaten warm. If the food is meant to be eaten raw, make sure you've cleaned it properly so that you protect yourself as much as possible.
Okay. Now, I had an experience. The food, it was cake.
Okay.
It was perfectly clean.
To your eye.
To my eye. It had been in the fridge for, let's say, a week.
Okay.
and it didn't smell off. Okay. And I ate it. And of course, I love cake, so there was a fair amount of it, and I did my best to consume a fair amount. Now, now, after, let me say, less than a day, I suddenly was thrown into the most horrible experience of, there wasn't any vomiting, but it was diarrhea.
Okay.
The most horrible experience of that. And I did feel like vomiting, but I suppressed it. I hate vomiting. So, but yeah, for I think 3 days.
Okay.
It was food poisoning. How would something that is apparently clean and it doesn't smell off give me food poisoning? It's cake, for goodness sake. Who gets food poisoning with cake?
So my first question would actually be, if you're in a consultation, I'd ask you, how do you know it was the cake? That would be my first question.
Okay.
So then.
Well, truth be told, I hadn't been feeling well generally around that time, so I hadn't eaten much.
Okay.
But that one was there. And at the point when I woke up from bed one of the days, and I was like, you know what, I just want to eat something. But I wasn't hungry. I just wanted to nibble on something. I went, and this was the cake sitting there in the fridge. It had been there a few days. I was very excited because I love this.
Yeah.
So then I
can tell the way you're describing.
I filled my heart's desire. Yes.
So it's difficult to tell why that cake caused your food poisoning because there are different stages that the cake has gone through.
Yeah.
So the cake was probably done properly. The delivery process, how clean was the delivery process? In the fridge, how was the cake kept? Did somebody open it and forgot to close it? Was the fridge on the whole time, or was there lights off or something? What were the conditions that
Okay, let me explain a little further. So this cake, the icing was done with dairy.
Okay.
It wasn't your regular icing.
Okay. So now you are bringing in.
It was dairy.
So now if it's dairy, then my question would be, was it unpasteurized milk? You see, because that's another major source of food poisoning.
Okay.
Milk has to be taken through certain processes to make it, for lack of a better word, to make it clean. And milk also has a tendency to spoil. So now it brings us back to the state of the fridge. Is it even possible that it was left outside the fridge for a long period before it went into the fridge? Because milk, once you leave it outside, it begins to curdle.
Okay.
And so there are a lot of factors. Could it even be that you are lactose intolerant? Because that could actually mimic some form of food poisoning. But that one comes with a lot of gas and discomfort, bloating, things like that.
This one
and still has a diarrhea as well. So the thing about food poisoning is it's very, very common, and multiple people can be affected at the same time, but to different degrees, depending on how much they consume. So let's say let's go back to the cake. You may have eaten one slice, somebody ate a whole half. The two of you will not have the same symptoms, even though both of you may have food poisoning. So the one who ate more, because he or she had a larger inoculum, he or she is going to have a more severe form of the disease.
Okay.
But generally, food poisoning tends to be it tends to be self-limiting. In the sense that if you have it, you have the discomfort. Most people don't need to go to hospital.
Okay.
For most people, they just sit in the house. They go through the process of expelling whatever, if it's diarrhea.
Yeah.
They experience the diarrhea for some time and then they are okay. But here, I want to just chip in quickly. People have the tendency of stopping the diarrhea. My recommendation, my advice, don't stop the diarrhea.
Okay.
Or before you decide to stop the diarrhea, consult your doctor.
Okay.
When I say stop diarrhea, what I mean is they take medication to stop the diarrhea.
Okay.
Now, when you do that, what you're actually doing is you are preventing the body's natural mechanism of getting rid of the toxins.
Yeah.
So the toxin is going to stay in your body for longer, which means it's going to cause more damage.
Yeah. Okay.
So what you tend to experience is that people who take these medications to stop the diarrhea, they tend to then have the diarrhea for a much longer period. If you actually don't take any medication, as I was saying, most people within a day or two, they are back, they are fine. Of course, if it's severe, you have to report hospital for fluid resuscitation and all that. But for most people, within a day or two, they are fine.
Okay.
But once you begin to take these medications to sort of prevent the diarrhea, you now tend to go 3, 4, 5. I've seen somebody go a week, and then obviously you're going to be weaker and all that. Of course, if you are writing an exam and you tend to have food poisoning, I mean, it makes sense to sort of put the diarrhea on hold so that you can go and write the exam or take care of the most important thing. But don't make it a habit, because I have people calling me all the time, I mean, coming to see me the consult all the time. I have diarrhea, I need medication to stop diarrhea. No, we don't stop diarrhea.
Okay.
Because it's the body's natural mechanism to try and remove whatever is causing the problem. Nausea and vomiting is a different thing, because that's really, really uncomfortable. And secondly, there's an alternative way for the same thing to come out anyway. So why do you want to go through nausea and vomiting? So that one, we would obviously want to minimize as much as possible. But diarrhea, we try not to stop diarrhea because it can cause problem, and especially if it's a kid.
Yeah.
If it's a kid and you stop the diarrhea, it could cause problems. I mean, I've seen complications of these things, and so my position is always allow the body to get rid of whatever is causing it. The poison must come out. That's what the diarrhea is doing.
Okay.
You see, and food poisoning, the symptoms can begin as early as an hour. Or as late as 1 to 2 days.
Okay.
So that it's quite a long range, and it depends on what the causative organism actually is.
Okay.
So there are bacteria that actually cause food poisoning. There are viruses. There are some parasites that can cause food poisoning. And the most common bacteria when it comes to food poisoning, we call them, is the Salmonella species. Okay. Salmonella, they cause a lot of the food poisoning, and which is why it's important that you make sure that your food that you're eating is, as hot as you can tolerate.
Okay.
First of all, it must be produced properly. It must have been done, prepared properly under hygienic situations. You must make sure you've washed your hands well. And even now we are in Corona season, so hand washing has become a part of our lives. So make sure the hands are washed, and then you eat the food, and you're fine. Make sure obviously there are no flies. Sometimes they say that the flies add flavor, but on this kind of flavor we don't want.
Yeah. All right, fantastic. Dr. Kelvin, how can people find you? How can people reach you?
Well, I'm on Facebook and Instagram as Kelvin Owusu MD, and then on Twitter as Nasa Epoku.
All right. Thank you very much for that intervention on food poisoning. It's very important for us to remember as we're going into this festive season, especially because we'll be eating all sorts of things, to make sure that it's well prepared, it's hygienic, and kept in a very safe environment before we consume it. All right. Dr. Kelvin is the director of Optimal Care Diagnostics. We'll be right back after this short break.